May 11th, 1957, 2:30 a.m., a basement counting house in Little Italy, New York. Vito Genovese stood in front of an empty safe. Behind him, 8 armed guards shifted nervously. On the floor, Anthony "Tony Bags" Marcetti held a cloth to his bleeding head. The safe door hung open. Inside, nothing. No money, no explanation. 72 hours earlier, that safe had been locked with 3 separate combinations, protected by armed guards around the clock, equipped with alarm systems that would wake up half of Little Italy. Tonight, it held $2.3 million, the weekly collection from every Genovese operation in New York. Numbers, gambling, protection, loan sharking, all of it. $2.3 million. Now? Gone. How? Genovese asked. His voice was quiet, controlled, terrifying. Nobody could answer him. The walls were solid. The floor was concrete. The ceiling had guards stationed above it. The only door had been watched all night. The alarm had never triggered. But somehow, impossibly, $2.3 million had vanished. Tony Bags looked up from the floor. "Boss, I tried to stop them. They came through the wall, through a tunnel. I never saw it before, I swear." Genovese walked to the wall Tony was pointing at. There it was, a hole, big enough for men to crawl through, leading to somewhere, a tunnel that nobody knew existed. "Find them," Genovese said. "Find whoever did this." But here's what Vito Genovese didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, what nobody would ever be able to prove. 72 hours earlier, on May 8th, Genovese had stolen $200,000 from Bumpy Johnson's operation. It was a power play, a message, a way to assert dominance over Harlem. Bumpy Johnson had made one phone call, set one plan in motion, and in 72 hours turned a $200,000 loss into Genovese's $2.3 million nightmare. This is the story of the most brilliant strategic revenge in organized crime history. A heist so perfect, so invisible, that even today nobody can prove exactly what happened. And by the time it was over, Vito Genovese, one of the most powerful mob bosses in America, would be asking Bumpy Johnson for peace. But before I show you exactly how Bumpy pulled off the impossible, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. These are the real stories of criminal genius that changed history. The strategic moves that nobody talks about. The intelligence that beat violence every single time. And drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching this from? New York? London? Sao Paulo? Tokyo? I want to know how far these stories of strategic brilliance are reaching. Now let me take you back to where this all started. May 8th, 1957. The night Vito Genovese made the biggest mistake of his criminal career. Bumpy Johnson's numbers operation in Harlem ran like clockwork. Every week, $50,000 to $75,000 flowed through a careful system of runners, collectors, and counters. The money came from thousands of small bets placed by working people hoping for a lucky number. It wasn't like Genovese's operation. Bumpy didn't squeeze people, didn't use fear. The numbers game was entertainment for Harlem residents who couldn't afford to go downtown to the fancy casinos. $1 bet here, $2 there. And when someone won, they got paid immediately, every time. That trust created loyalty, and loyalty created protection. Every numbers runner, every collector, every shop owner who took bets, they were all part of a community system. They watched out for each other. They watched out for Bumpy. By 1957, Bumpy Johnson had been running this system for over 20 years. It was clean, professional, respected, and Vito Genovese wanted a piece of it. May 8th, 1957. 11 House p.m., a collection point in Harlem, 132nd Street between Lenox and Fifth Avenue. 2 of Bumpy's men, Marcus Williams and James Jazz Patterson, were doing the weekly collection. They'd gathered money from 15 different runners, counting and organizing it in the back room of a legitimate barbershop. Standard procedure. They'd done it 100 times. $200,000 in cash sat in a leather briefcase on the table. Nearly 3 weeks' worth of collections, saved up for a specific investment Bumpy was making in several Harlem businesses. At 11 p.m. exactly, the back door burst open. 6 men, Genovese's crew, professional, armed with pistols and blackjacks. They moved like military, like they'd rehearsed this. Marcus reached for his gun, never got it out. Two men grabbed him, slammed him against the wall. Jazz tried to fight, got a blackjack across his jaw for his effort. The leader, a man named Sal the Shark Benedetti, walked to the briefcase, opened it, smiled. "Vito sends his regards," Sal said. "Tell your boss Harlem pays tribute now. This is the first installment." They were gone in 90 seconds. Out the back door, into two waiting cars, disappeared into the night. Marcus and Jazz were left on the floor, beaten but alive. The message was clear. By 11:30 p.m., the phone rang in Bumpy Johnson's apartment. "They hit the 132nd Street spot," Marcus said. His voice was tight with pain and anger. "Took everything. 200,000. It was Genovese's crew. They said we pay tribute now." There was silence on the other end. Then Bumpy spoke, his voice calm. "You and Jazz need medical attention?" "We're fine, Bumpy, but..." "Good. Go home. Rest. Don't do anything. Don't talk to anybody. I'll handle this." "Bumpy, they took 200 grand. We gotta..." "I said I'll handle it." Click. Most men would have gone to war immediately, called in every soldier, hit back harder, made Genovese bleed. That's what the streets expected. That's what Genovese was counting on. But Bumpy Johnson made one phone call and started planning something nobody would see coming. 11:35 p.m., same night. Bumpy called Willie Chess Monroe. Chess wasn't muscle. He was Bumpy's accountant, strategist, and information specialist. A man who understood that in the criminal world, information was more valuable than guns. "Chess, I need to know everything about Genovese's money. Where it goes, how it moves, where it sits, who handles it, everything." "That's a big ask, Bumpy. I got 72 hours. "What happened?" "Genovese took 200,000 from us. Called it tribute." Chess was quiet for a moment. "You going to war?" "No, I'm going to make him wish he'd never heard of Harlem, but I need information first." Here's what confused everyone who knew about the theft. Bumpy didn't retaliate, didn't even make noise about it. For the next 24 hours, he went about his business normally, visited his usual spots, took meetings, acted like nothing had happened. The streets started talking. "Bumpy's gone soft. Genovese punked him. Maybe Harlem can be pushed around now." But that's exactly what Bumpy wanted them to think. Because while everyone was talking, nobody was watching what Bumpy was actually doing. See, Bumpy understood something fundamental about revenge. Violence is easy. Violence is expected. Violence is what men like Genovese understand and prepare for. You hit someone, they hit back. You hit back harder. It's a predictable cycle. But strategic revenge, revenge that hits where your enemy can't defend, revenge that doesn't leave your fingerprints anywhere, that's art. Bumpy sat in his apartment that night thinking. Genovese took $200,000. Bumpy could take it back, maybe kill a few of Genovese's men in the process. Start a war that would cost both sides money and lives. Or Bumpy could think bigger. He took 200,000, Bumpy said quietly to himself. I'll take his empire. While Bumpy was calculating, his intelligence network was activating. This was the real weapon. Not guns, not muscle. Information. Bartenders in Little Italy, who served Genovese's men, started paying attention to conversations. Dock workers who handled shipments that included Genovese's smuggled goods kept their eyes open. Corrupt cops on Bumpy's payroll started asking questions. Numbers runners with connections to both operations listened more carefully. Every piece of information flowed back to Chess Monroe, and Chess built a picture. By the afternoon of May 9th, 18 hours after the theft, Chess walked into Bumpy's apartment with a folder full of notes. You're going to want to see this, Chess said. What he showed Bumpy would change everything. Genovese had a counting house, a central location where money from all his operations came together once a week. Thursday nights at 11 p.m., the money was counted, divided, and distributed Friday morning to various soldiers, operations, and investments. How much goes through there? Bumpy asked. 2 to 3 million, every week. Bumpy looked up. Where is it? Basement in Little Italy. Corner building, 8 armed guards. Steel door with 3 locks. Alarm system. Boss, it's a fortress. Nobody's ever hit it because nobody can. Tell me about the people who work there. And that's when Chess showed him the key, the weakness, the one thing that would make the impossible possible. Anthony Tony Bags Marcetti, head counter, trusted by Genovese for 15 years, handled millions without ever skimming a dollar, and he owed $75,000 to independent bookies, gambling debts that Genovese didn't know about, debts that were about to get Tony killed if he didn't pay up within the month. Bumpy smiled. Within 18 hours, Bumpy knew something that would change everything. Genovese had a weakness, and it was costing him $2 million a week. The counting house was in the basement of a corner building on Mulberry Street. From the outside, it looked like a regular commercial building. Ground floor had a legitimate importing business. Upper floors had apartments. But the basement was different. Getting in required passing through a steel door with 3 separate combination locks. Once inside, you faced 8 armed guards, 4 on the main floor, 4 in rotating positions watching entrances and exits. The walls were reinforced concrete. The windows were barred. An alarm system connected directly to a building full of Genovese's men 3 blocks away. Every Thursday night at 11 p.m., money arrived. Crews from different operations brought their weekly takes. Numbers, gambling, protection, loan sharking, smuggling. All of it converged in that basement. Tony Bags and 2 assistants would spend the next 3 hours counting, organizing, recording. By 2 a.m., they'd have the complete picture of Genovese's empire for that week. By 8 a.m., Friday, the money would be divided up and distributed. $2 to $3 million cycled through that room every single week. Security was meticulous. Guards were rotated so no 2 worked the same shift too often. The combinations to the locks changed weekly. Only 3 people knew all 3 combinations: Genovese, his underboss, and Tony Bags. It seemed impenetrable, and for 15 years it had been. But here's the thing about perfect security systems. They're built on trust. Trust that the people inside the system are loyal. Trust that they're not compromised. Trust that they'll never turn. Tony Bags was a good counter, meticulous, honest. In 15 years, he'd never shorted Genovese a single dollar. That's why Genovese trusted him with the combinations. That's why Tony was allowed to be alone in the room with millions of dollars. But Tony had a problem. He liked to gamble, not on numbers, on horses, and he was terrible at it. Over 3 years, Tony had accumulated $75,000 in debt to independent bookies who weren't connected to Genovese. Tony had been careful to keep it hidden. He paid when he could, borrowed from other sources to make minimum payments, kept the bookies from going to Genovese. But by May 1957, the bookies were done waiting. They wanted their $75,000, and if Tony didn't pay by June 1st, they were going to Genovese with the information. If that happened, Tony was dead. Genovese didn't tolerate that kind of liability in people who handled his money. Tony was trapped. He couldn't steal from Genovese to pay the debt. He'd be caught immediately. He couldn't run. Genovese's reach was too long. He couldn't borrow any more money. He was already tapped out. He was a desperate man. And desperate men make mistakes. Or in this case, desperate men become opportunities. Chess laid it all out for Bumpy. Tony's got 3 weeks before the bookies go to Genovese. He's got no way out. He's dead either way. Unless someone gives him a way out, Bumpy said quietly. You thinking what I think you're thinking? I'm thinking Tony Bags is about to get an offer he can't refuse. But Bumpy had a problem. How do you steal $2 million from a fortress without leaving any evidence you were ever there? The answer would require the most careful planning of Bumpy's career. Because this wasn't just about stealing money. This was about sending a message, proving a point, demonstrating that intelligence beats force every single time, and doing it in a way that Genovese could never, ever prove Bumpy was involved. May 9, 1957, 2 p.m., a coffee shop in Greenwich Village. Neutral territory, no mob affiliations. Tony Bags sat at a corner table. Drinking coffee, his hands were shaking too much to enjoy. He was expecting the bookies to send someone to pressure him again, to threaten him, to remind him that June 1st was coming. Instead, Chess Monroe sat down across from him. Tony knew who Chess was. Everyone in the New York underworld knew Chess. Bumpy Johnson's right hand, the strategist, the man who turned Bumpy's intelligence into action. "I don't want any trouble," Tony said immediately. "Relax. I'm here to help you." "I don't need help. You owe $75,000 to bookies who are about to tell Vito Genovese about it. You've got 3 weeks to live unless something changes. Tony, you need help very badly." Tony went pale. "How do you know about—" "We know everything, Tony. That's what we do. But here's the thing. We don't want to hurt you. We want to help you. And in the process, you're going to help us." Chess slid an envelope across the table. "There's $100,000 in cash in there. Plus, we'll talk to the bookies. They'll forgive your debt completely. You walk away clean." Tony stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "What do you want? Thursday night? The counting house? We need your cooperation. You want me to help you rob Genovese? You're insane. He'll kill me. He'll kill my family. He won't. Because we're going to make it look like you tried to stop us. Like you're the hero. Like you nearly died protecting his money." Tony shook his head. "You don't understand. That place is a fortress. 8 guards, alarms. There's no way." "Tony, we're not asking you to let us walk in the front door. We have a plan. A good one. But it only works with your help. And when it's over, you'll be alive, debt-free, with money in your pocket, and Genovese will trust you even more than he does now." "That's impossible." "No, it's just complicated. But if you're smart, if you follow instructions exactly, it works. And you survive." Tony was quiet for a long time. He looked at the envelope, looked at Chess, looked at his coffee cup like it might have answers. Here's the thing about impossible choices. They're only impossible until someone gives you a third option. Tony had been facing 2 paths, death from bookies or death from Genovese. Both roads led to the same place. Now Chess was offering a third path, a narrow one, a dangerous one, but the only one that led to survival. "If I say no," Tony asked quietly, "we walk away. You're on your own. The bookies go to Genovese in 3 weeks. We never had this conversation. And if I say yes, you follow our instructions exactly. Thursday night, things happen that are out of your control. You play your part. By Friday morning, you're a hero who tried to stop a robbery. Genovese promotes you for your loyalty, and you get to keep living." Tony's hands were still shaking, but now it wasn't just fear. It was the weight of the decision. "Tell me the plan," he said finally. Chess smiled. "First, let's talk about what you need to do, and more importantly, what you need to not do." For the next 3 hours, Chess laid it out. Every detail, every timing, every contingency. Tony listened, asked questions, slowly started to believe it might actually work. By 5:01 p.m., Tony Baggs had agreed to the most dangerous thing he'd ever do: help Bumpy Johnson rob Vito Genovese blind. The next day, May 10th, they rehearsed. Not at the actual location, too risky, but Chess had rented a basement space with similar dimensions. They walked through the timing, practiced the movements, went over contingencies. "What if the power doesn't flicker?" Tony asked. "It will. We've arranged it." "What if the guards notice something wrong?" "They won't. Everything will look like equipment failure." "What if Genovese figures out I helped?" "He can't. The evidence will prove you tried to stop it. You'll have injuries to prove it." "Injuries? Nothing permanent, but you need to look like you fought, like you almost died trying to protect his money." Tony swallowed hard. This was really happening. Thursday night, May 11th, 1957. The counting house had $2.3 million inside. By Friday morning, it would all be gone, and nobody would be able to prove what happened. May 11th, 1957. 10:45 p.m. The counting house operated like clockwork. 8 guards took their positions. Tony Baggs and his 2 assistants arrived with their briefcases and accounting ledgers. The steel door with 3 combination locks was sealed. Outside on Mulberry Street, everything looked normal. Cars passed by, a few pedestrians, nothing suspicious. 3 blocks away, in the basement of an old building that officially housed a closed restaurant, Bumpy Johnson sat with 4 of his most trusted men. They'd been in that basement for 3 hours, waiting. Not in Genovese's basement, in the basement next door. Here's what nobody knew. The building that housed Genovese's counting house was built in 1922, during Prohibition, and like many buildings from that era, it had tunnels. The mob had used these tunnels to move illegal alcohol during the 1920s. By 1957, most people had forgotten they existed. The entrances had been sealed, plastered over, built around. Most of them, but not all. Chess Monroe had spent 2 weeks researching old building records, Prohibition-era mob history, speaking to men who'd run liquor in the old days, and he'd found it, a tunnel that connected the building next door to Genovese's counting house. The entrance next door was in a basement that currently belonged to a closed restaurant. Bumpy had quietly arranged to lease it through 3 layers of shell companies. Nobody could trace it back to him. His crew had spent the past week carefully, quietly, breaking through the wall on their side. They'd stopped just before the breakthrough point, leaving just enough plaster and brick that it wouldn't be visible from Genovese's side, but thin enough to break through quickly when the time came. Now they waited. 10:45 p.m. Inside the counting house, money started arriving. Genovese's crews brought their weekly takes, numbers from the Bronx, gambling from Brooklyn, protection money from Manhattan, loan sharking profits, smuggling income. By 11:15 p.m., $2.3 million sat in stacks on the counting table. Tony Baggs and his 2 assistants began the count. The guards watched, bored. They'd done this every Thursday for years. Nothing ever happened. 11:20 p.m. The lights flickered. Everyone looked up. The backup generator kicked in immediately, standard procedure. For about 3 seconds, everything was fine. Then the lights flickered again. And the backup alarm system reset. This wasn't supposed to happen. But equipment fails sometimes. Old buildings have power issues. The head guard frowned. "Tony, check the fuse box." Tony stood up. "Yeah, give me a second." He walked to the electrical panel on the far wall, opened it, looked at the breakers like he knew what he was doing. The lights stabilized. The backup generator hummed normally. Everything seemed fine. What nobody saw. During those 45 seconds of power fluctuation, Tony had unlocked and slightly opened a small electrical access panel low on the wall. A panel that, on the other side, connected to the old Prohibition tunnel. In the next basement, Bumpy's crew heard the signal knock. They began breaking through the remaining brick and plaster, quietly, quickly. The noise of the backup generator covered most of the sound. 11:35 p.m. Back in the counting house, Tony and his assistants continued counting. The guards were back to their board routine. Nothing seemed wrong. Behind the electrical panel, now hidden behind Tony's body as he adjusted the fuses, a hole was opening. Just big enough for a briefcase. Just big enough to pass stacks of money through. This wasn't a traditional heist. No one burst in with guns. No one threatened anyone. No alarms were triggered. No doors were forced. Instead, over the next 30 minutes, while Tony counted money at the table in full view of everyone, his assistant, a man named Raymond, who was actually one of Bumpy's people, planted months ago, made regular trips to check on the electrical situation. Each trip, Raymond passed briefcases full of money through that small opening. On the other side, Bumpy's crew took the briefcases and replaced them with empty ones. The brilliant part? Tony kept counting, kept organizing, kept looking busy. The guards saw exactly what they expected to see. Tony doing his job. By 12:05 a.m., every dollar was gone. The tunnel opening was sealed again from both sides. The electrical panel was closed. Everything looked normal, except the money was gone. 12:10 a.m., Tony discovered the problem. "Wait," he said, looking at his ledger. "Wait, this doesn't add up." He walked to the safe where the already counted money should have been stored. Opened it, empty. "What the?" Tony spun around. "Where's the money? Where's the?" That's when he saw it. The electrical panel, now that he was looking properly, had scuff marks around it, fresh plaster dust on the floor. "Oh my God," Tony said. He pulled the panel open. Behind it, the hole in the wall was now visible. Bumpy's crew had left it exposed on purpose. "Tunnel!" Tony shouted. "There's a tunnel! They came through the wall!" The guards rushed over, saw the hole, saw the tunnel disappearing into darkness. Tony tried to run toward the tunnel, playing his part. The head guard grabbed him. Tony, stop. There could be... They took everything. They took all of it. That's when Tony did the hardest part of the plan. He slammed his own head against the steel doorframe. Hard. Blood poured down his face. He collapsed. The guards caught him, suddenly dealing with an injured man instead of a robbery. The chaos was perfect. By 2:30 a.m., Vito Genovese was standing in that counting house, looking at $2.3 million gone, and nobody could tell him who did it. Stop for a second. Imagine you're Vito Genovese right now. You stole $200,000 from Bumpy Johnson 3 days ago. You were feeling powerful, untouchable, and now $2.3 million is gone from your most secure location, and you have no idea who did it. What would you do? Drop your answer in the comments. Because what Genovese did next shows why intelligence always beats force. May 11th, dawn. Genovese didn't sleep. He stood in that counting house all night, interrogating everyone, examining everything, trying to understand how this was possible. Tony Bagg sat with a bandage around his head, looking shaken and traumatized. His story was simple and consistent. He was counting money, heard a noise, saw the panel open, saw men in the tunnel, tried to stop them, got hit, blacked out. The physical evidence supported every word. Head wound, consistent with his story. Tunnel clearly used recently. Scuff marks, plaster dust. The 8 guards confirmed they'd seen nothing during the power flicker, too busy dealing with the backup generator reset. By the time everything was stable, it was too late. Genovese brought in experts, engineers who examined the tunnel. It was old, Prohibition era, connected to the building next door, which was currently leased to nobody, a closed restaurant, owned by a shell company, owned by another shell company, owned by another. Dead end. Who knew about this tunnel? Genovese demanded. Nobody. It wasn't on any modern blueprints. It had been forgotten for 30 years. Who could plan something this elaborate? The 5 families? No evidence any of them knew about it. Independent crews? None that sophisticated. Inside job? Tony nearly died trying to stop it. What about Bumpy Johnson? Genovese's men checked. Bumpy was in Harlem that entire night, visible at the Cotton Club from 10:01 p.m. to 1 a.m., surrounded by witnesses. His usual crew was with him. All of them had alibis. Could Bumpy have people Genovese didn't know about? Maybe, but there was no evidence, no witnesses, no fingerprints, no way to prove anything. Genovese interrogated his own men, used intimidation, threats, violence, trying to find the leak, the traitor, the inside man. But Tony's story held up perfectly, because it was mostly true. He had tried to stop it. That part Genovese's men saw. He had gotten injured. The blood was real. He had raised the alarm immediately. What Genovese couldn't see was the 30 minutes when Tony was counting money, while briefcases were being passed through a wall behind an electrical panel. The investigation went on for days. Genovese tore apart the criminal underworld looking for his money. He leaned on informants, threatened rivals, searched for any hint of who'd moved that much cash. Nothing. $2.3 million had vanished like it never existed. The cost was staggering. Beyond the money itself, Genovese couldn't pay his soldiers that week. Had to use emergency reserves. Operations were disrupted. Other crime families watched with interest. If Genovese's fortress could be breached, what did that say about his power? Worse, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. 3 days after taking $200,000 from Bumpy Johnson, Genovese loses $2.3 million. The streets did the math. Even if nobody could prove Bumpy was involved, everyone suspected. And that suspicion hurt Genovese almost as much as the money. "You got played by Bumpy Johnson," other bosses whispered. "He's smarter than you." Genovese couldn't respond. Couldn't prove anything. Couldn't retaliate against someone he couldn't even confirm was involved. His reputation, the thing that kept his empire running, took a massive hit. But here's what nobody knew except Bumpy Johnson. The heist wasn't even the most brilliant part of his plan, because what Bumpy did with that money would change everything. The $2.3 million didn't go to Bumpy's personal accounts, didn't sit in a safe somewhere in Harlem, didn't get used to expand his own operations. Instead, over the next 2 weeks, it disappeared into Harlem, but not the way anyone expected. $500,000 went to churches, anonymously donated through various intermediaries, repairs on buildings, new programs for kids, support for families in need. $400,000 went to small businesses. Shop owners who'd been struggling suddenly got anonymous loans with impossible terms. No interest, pay back whenever you can. $300,000 went to families. Widows whose husbands had been killed by mob violence, kids who needed to go to college but couldn't afford it, medical bills that were destroying working families. $200,000 went back to numbers runners and collectors who'd been beaten up or robbed by outside crews over the years. Reparations, making them whole. $200,000 went to independent bookies, including the ones that Tony Baggs had owed money to, paid them off, established good relationships, created new allies. $100,000 stayed with Tony Baggs, as promised, and Bumpy kept $200,000 for himself, exactly what Genovese had stolen from him. Why would Bumpy give away $2.1 million? After pulling off the perfect heist, why not keep it all? Because Bumpy understood something that men like Genovese never would. Money is a tool, not a goal. Power doesn't come from how much you have. It comes from what you do with it. By distributing that money throughout Harlem, Bumpy accomplished several things simultaneously. First, it was nearly impossible to trace. $2.3 million in one place? Obvious, suspicious, easy to track. But $2.3 million distributed among hundreds of small transactions, donations, and payments over 2 weeks? It disappeared into the community like water into soil. Second, it created loyalty that money can't buy. Every person who received help knew where it came from. Maybe not officially, maybe not in a way they'd ever testify to, but they knew, and they remembered. Third, it sent a message. Genovese used his money to intimidate, to hurt, to control. Bumpy used Genovese's money to help, to build, to protect. The moral victory was almost more important than the strategic one. Fourth, and this was the genius part, it made Genovese look like a fool. His money, stolen from him, used to help the very community he tried to extract tribute from. The poetic justice was perfect. Genovese suspected, had to suspect. The timing was too perfect. 3 days after stealing from Bumpy, $2.3 million disappears. Harlem suddenly prospers. Anonymous donations everywhere. But he couldn't prove anything, and more importantly, he couldn't do anything about it. Because if he went after Bumpy without proof, he'd look weak and desperate. And if he went to war with Harlem now, after this humiliation, other families might side with Bumpy just to watch Genovese fall further. The message to Genovese was clear. You can't touch Harlem. You tried, you failed, and it cost you $2.3 million. The message to other families. Intelligence beats force. Strategy beats violence. Think twice before testing Bumpy Johnson. The message to Harlem. I protect you. Not just from outside threats, but I use those threats to make your lives better. And the message to the entire criminal underworld. There are different ways to have power. Bumpy's way, built on respect, intelligence, and community, was stronger than Genovese's way, built on fear and force. 3 weeks later, something happened that proved Bumpy's genius once and for all. May 28, 1957. 3 weeks after the heist, an intermediary knocked on the door of Bumpy's apartment. A neutral party, someone who worked with multiple families as a facilitator. Message from Vito Genovese, the man said. Bumpy invited him in, offered coffee, waited. Mr. Genovese wanted me to convey that he has great respect for Harlem's independence. He recognizes that his previous arrangement was not mutually beneficial. He wishes to establish a respectful relationship moving forward. Translation, I'm done. I can't prove you did it, but I know you did. I'm not asking for tribute anymore. Please don't embarrass me further. Tell Mr. Genovese, Bumpy said calmly, that Harlem has always been open to respectful relationships with all families. We're not looking for conflict. We're not expanding into anyone's territory. We just want to handle our own business our own way. Translation, I won, you lost. Let's both pretend this never happened and move on. The intermediary nodded and left. That was it. No big confrontation. No dramatic showdown. just a quiet acknowledgement that a new status quo had been established. Genovese never publicly admitted what happened, never told anyone outside his closest circle about the $2.3 million. Couldn't. The embarrassment would have been worse than the financial loss. But word spread anyway. In the criminal underworld, information always leaks. Other families heard. They understood what it meant. Don't mess with Harlem. Don't mess with Bumpy Johnson. Tony Baggs got promoted. Genovese genuinely believed Tony had tried to stop the robbery, had been injured protecting the money, had done everything right. For trying to be a hero, Tony got moved to a better position, closer to Genovese, more trust, more responsibility. And occasionally, very occasionally, Tony would pass along a piece of information to Chess Monroe. Nothing major, nothing that would get Tony killed. Just enough to keep Bumpy informed about Genovese's movements. The double victory. Tony survived with money and position. Bumpy gained an asset inside Genovese's organization. The broader impact rippled through New York's underworld. Other crime families that had been considering moves into Harlem backed off. Not because they were afraid of Bumpy's violence, but because they were afraid of his intelligence. You can defend against violence. You know how to prepare for a war. But how do you defend against an enemy who can steal from your most secure location and leave no evidence? How do you protect yourself from someone who can turn your own systems against you? You can't, so you leave them alone. For the rest of Bumpy's life, he'd live until 1968. No major crime family would seriously challenge Harlem's independence. They'd try small moves sometimes, test the waters. But nothing like Genovese's attempt, because everyone remembered what happened when you took $200,000 from Bumpy Johnson. You lost $2.3 million and couldn't even prove he did it. Here's what makes this story matter beyond just a clever heist. Most people think power comes from force, from being able to hurt people, from being the toughest, the meanest, the most violent. That's what Vito Genovese believed. That's why he thought he could just take money from Bumpy and establish dominance through intimidation. But Bumpy Johnson proved something different. Real power comes from intelligence, from understanding systems and finding weaknesses, from turning an enemy's strength into their vulnerability. More than that, Bumpy showed that how you use power matters. He could have kept that $2.3 million. Could have used it to expand, to buy weapons, to hire more soldiers. But instead, he gave most of it away to his community. And that act of giving created more loyalty, more protection, more lasting power than any amount of money in a safe ever could. Genovese controlled through fear, but fear only lasts as long as you're the scariest person in the room. Bumpy built loyalty through respect and protection, and loyalty lasts forever. That's why Bumpy Johnson remained powerful for over 30 years. That's why Harlem stayed independent when every other territory was being carved up by the five families. That's why even today, people who knew Bumpy speak about him with respect rather than fear. So here's my question for you. Could you have planned this? Could you have taken a $200,000 loss and turned it into a $2.3 million victory without ever throwing a punch? Could you have thought 5 moves ahead the way Bumpy did? Drop your answer in the comments below. Tell me if you would have gone to war or played the long game. And let me know where in the world you're watching this from. New York, where it happened? London? Dubai? Lagos? Melbourne? I love seeing how far these stories of strategic brilliance reach across the globe. If you made it this far, hit that subscribe button right now, because I'm bringing you more stories like this. The strategic genius moves that changed organized crime history. The intelligence that beat violence. The planning that made the impossible happen. Next time, we're telling the story of how Bumpy Johnson saved Carlo Gambino's life, and how the most powerful mob boss in America spent the next 15 years repaying that debt. Until then, remember, intelligence always beats violence, strategy always beats force, and community loyalty beats everything.